Neil Morgan with BrightStar Partners. We're going to give it another minute or two for people to join, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the Wednesday webinar series. This month's webinar is focused on two IBM Cognos technologies, Lifecycle Manager and multi-version Coexistence. Again, my name is Neil Morgan. I'm one of the partners at BrightStar Partners. And when we get to the live portion of this webinar, if something goes wrong, you'll note that it would be entirely my fault for not having taken the advice or the example of the IBM and Cognos executive staff who frequently records the live portion, and then magically the mouse is moving around the screen. So I'm going to do my demo live. I like to live on the edge a little bit, and we'll see how far we get through with this technology. But so far it's proven to be very reliable. All right, just a quick introduction to who BrightStar Partners is, as well as BSP Software. There are really four parts to our business. BrightStar Partners typically refers to the professional services side of the organization, which is an area that I head up. We have a number of on-staff, very tenured, seasoned Cognos professional services folks who work in a variety of industries and a variety of client sizes and types. Second pillar to our business is our implementation-based software underneath BSP Software. My business partner, Andy Rockmeal, heads that portion of the business up as well. And in that, we're adding additional value to the Cognos tool stack by creating software that enables developers to do the jobs more efficiently, as well as creating capabilities within Cognos, such as version control, check-in, check-out, and archiving that does not natively exist in the tool today. The third part of our business is we are a Cognos reseller underneath our premier business partner status with IBM, and we can help you with license purchases, upgrades, as well as support renewals, which is something new this year. So if there's anything we can do to assist you on the Cognos license side of the house, please feel free to reach out to us. And the fourth part of our business is Cognoise.com, which is an online web community of roughly almost 14,000 users worldwide who are interacting with one another and supporting each other in terms of asking questions, getting responses, etc. On average, we're roughly around 700,000 page views a month, so a very active site, and definitely invite you to check it out when you have the chance. Again, it's Cognoise.com. All right, we have a lot to get through today. Typically, we try to keep these webinars down to about half an hour, and I'm going to move through the slide portion very quickly because the real value is in taking a look at the tool and examining how we use, in the first part of our agenda, Lifecycle Manager during the upgrade process for our clients. The second part, which we'll touch on at the end, and depending upon how much time is left, will dictate how far we get into multi-version coexistence. But you know, the goal with multi-version coexistence, I'm not going to steal my own thunder for later on. Suffice it to say that multi-version coexistence is an important new feature for clients who are doing upgrades to the Cognos 10 platform. All right, so Lifecycle Manager. Really, there are a number of different ways to use Lifecycle Manager. The main area that we want to focus in on today is looking at report output between a previous version of Cognos, and in the example today it will be Cognos 841 and Cognos 10, which would be our upgrade target. Lifecycle Manager supports Report Studio, Query Studio, and Analysis Studio reports, as well as all output formats. So as we're doing comparisons across output format types, we'll have a number of tools that we can use to ease that process, as well as provide a workflow around the whole report output validation process. So how does Lifecycle Manager work, and what does it look like in terms of a topology, if you will? Lifecycle Manager is a Windows-only tool. Typically, developers and testers will install it on their laptops or desktops and connect into both the source system, in our case 841, and the target system, which is Cognos 10.1. When it connects in, it is performing a number of different steps within those environments. So you have to have connectivity to both those environments as well as valid user credentials for both of those environments. An important point to note is that during the process of comparison, it is retrieving output locally. So that does, by virtue of the fact that it is pulling a fair amount of information down to the desktop, limits you in terms of how much you can do all at one time. But I think in practice you'll find that this tool is geared towards working with sets of reports rather than an entire 10,000 report library all at once. And as far as support for source and target platforms, it really doesn't care if you're running Windows, Linux, or Unix, or what flavor of Unix you might be running, as long as it's a Cognos-supported environment. It's essentially connecting into Cognos, and it is agnostic as to what the actual hardware platform is underneath the Cognos server environment. Okay, when we get into Lifecycle Manager, there are really two places to start. There's validation projects and benchmark projects. Our focus will be on validation projects, which allows us to compare report output between two environments, which is one of the main differences between these two types of projects. A benchmark project will allow you to connect into a single environment and work within that environment to establish benchmarks, look at report timings, as well as very effectively providing a mechanism for regression testing. All right, I told you I get through the slides relatively quickly, so let's go ahead and jump into the demo for Lifecycle Manager. Lifecycle Manager actually runs within a browser window, and this is the opening pane when you start up Lifecycle Manager. I'm going to create a new project, and rather than have you watch me hand type the login information, I'm going to use an existing project, and we will call this project just webinar. Let's go ahead and take a look at, I'll cover this portion of the interface in a few minutes, but let's go ahead and take a look at the configuration that is already in place based on starting with an existing project. The main parts of the configuration portion of Lifecycle Manager are identifying your source and target environments. In this case, I've just generically named it Cognos 841 as my source, and my target is Cognos 10. You can see I'm providing gateway and dispatcher URIs, as well as identifying the version of source or target system. 841 is not a named version here, but 8.4 is, and if you're running 8.4.1, you would select 8.4, as I have done in this case. The security tab is where you establish your credentials. To make life easier for myself, I've enabled anonymous access, so I don't need to provide credentials. But certainly, if you are accessing, live systems, you will have credentials you identify here. In this case, I'm testing to make sure that my credentials, i.e., anonymous access, still works for my source system, as well as my target system. Under Advanced, there are a number of preference settings that we can set up to aid the overall project here. A few that I've changed for the purposes of this demo are the number of items per page, as I would rather scroll than have to page down to see all of my content. As well as at the bottom, what I'm doing is I'm effectively sampling as I'm doing my comparison. So rather than compare entire reports between source and target systems, I'm comparing just the beginning 5 pages and ending 5 pages. In a real-world environment where we're doing heavy validation, you would leave this set to all, so it would compare the entire report output between source and target. But in this case, to keep the process moving quickly, given the time frame that we are under, I'm just looking at the first 5 and last 5 pages. And lastly, on preferences, a number of different format options are available in terms of output formats that we want to look at. Again, keeping in mind with meeting our deadline here of half past the hour, we're going to stick with PDF as the output format that we're focusing in on. It does support different options around dynamic query mode, as well as language options that you may have in your environment. I'm going to cancel out of here, and we're going to jump in and generate the report list. And what Lifecycle Manager really is doing is it's connecting into the Cognos server environment and pulling down the list of content out of the content store and allowing us to choose sets of reports that we want to focus in on for our report output comparison. And I'm going to jump ahead and just focus in on this one folder and the reports within this documentation report samples folder underneath our favorite Go Sales and Retailers package. I'll click OK, and this part here is effectively Lifecycle Manager going out and starting to pull down a lot of metadata information about the reports that are within that folder, as well as setting the stage for the workflow that we're going to follow working through the examples that we'll cover today. The overall workflow is defined up here, and it's probably a little hard to see because it's grayed out somewhat, underneath tasks, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, let's take a few minutes here to take a look at the main interface that we'll be working within for Lifecycle Manager. Lifecycle Manager has a number of steps that we'll go through. There are ways to shortcut and combine some of these steps, but in order to get across the overall process a little bit better, we'll focus in on each step individually so you understand what's happening start to finish. The tasks here on the side are effectively the main steps that we'll follow in connecting into the source system, validating and running reports there, connecting into the target system, which is in this case Cognos 10, and validating and running reports there. And then the real meat of the tool is in this output comparison area here. So let's take a look also at this main part of the screen here and dive into each of the elements individually so understand what the interface looks like. The name of the folder, Go Sales and Retailers, a package folder, and then we drive into the individual report folder here. And it will provide us a list of reports that are available in this folder here. It'll give us the status of those reports as it relates to the validate in source, which is the first step of the process. It will identify whether dynamic query mode is enabled or disabled. The progress column here is one that we'll spend a few minutes on, as well as a few other columns we'll touch base throughout the webinar here today. I'm going to click Progress to sort that list and get some of the reports up near the top that I need to work with. I'm not going to work with the entire list of reports, as it will, nobody wants to sit and watch the hourglass turn, so we're just going to focus in on a few key reports that are important to getting the points across today. You'll notice that some of these reports have prompt values, and those prompt values have not been set. Since we're in the first step of this process where we're connecting into our 841 source system and needing to validate the reports, we need to set some prompt values for those reports. I'm just going to work with a total of 5 reports today. So we'll pick 2 that have prompt values missing, and we'll pick 3 that don't need to have prompt values set. We'll change the drop-down box here in the lower right, and we'll click Go. Cognos is now opening up those reports, assessing the prompts, and automatically loading in some prompt values for those 2 reports. Now they're down out of this list here, and they're in the main body of the report, so we don't have to effectively look for them here. That's already been taken care of. So the first step to provide prompt values has now been taken care of. Let's dive in, and let's do the validate in the source environment. with the same 5 reports that we're going to look at. So the first report we'll look at here is create a crosstab report. Look at create a report with multiple pages, a date range list report that we just provided prompts for, as well as the last 2 here in the list. Our selection here is to validate, and again, we're connected to our source system, which is our Cognos 841 source environment. I'll go ahead and click validate and let the process run through and do the validation of those reports in the source system. Everything comes back green. Again, this is our main column we're looking at here. We've got green dots indicating that the first step in the process has been completed and everything looks good. It did find that dynamic query mode is disabled in the source system for these reports and has noted that there, as well as set the status for those 5 reports we're looking at. One thing to note that in the progress column, there are 5 basically dots or status areas. Each of those corresponds to these in order in terms of tasks. So we've completed the validate in our 841 source environment. For those 5 reports, they show up green, everything looks good. Let's move on to the next step in the process, which is, again, in our 841 source environment, we're going to go ahead and run those reports and generate the output. So I'll select those 5 reports again, click go, and Lifecycle Manager is connecting into the 841 environment. It is running those reports in the 841 environment, and then it will be collecting the report output coming back out of the 841 environment. Again, there's really the main 5 steps. We're doing the validate and run in the source system. We'll repeat that in the target system, and then we'll jump to the output comparison. So reports ran fine in the source system, and we have the outputs generated there. Next step in the process is to repeat those 2 steps up in the target system. So as you see, the workflow here, once you get used to the interface, is relatively straightforward and very repeatable. We'll let that turn here for a moment. And as you are listening to this webinar today, if you do have questions, feel free to enter them into the GoToMeeting interface. And we do have several of my colleagues on the line as well who will be answering questions directly through the GoToMeeting interface, as well as we'll be collecting those and sending out the questions and answers to everyone who attends today. Okay, so we've got something red. In our target environment, the date range list has failed. Basically failed the validation step. So I'll go into properties, and under the target validation result, I'll see that there is a error message here with regards to prompt values. This is one of the reports that we created prompts for. So there's something going on there. Rather than take the time to debug it right now, what I'm going to do is I am going to show you an option here that I can move that report to out of scope. So that way, any further actions that might involve that report are effectively going to be skipped, and the Lifecycle Manager is not going to consider that report for the subsequent steps. Everything else looks fine. So let's go ahead and run those reports in our target system. We'll select the same 5 reports. I will select the one that I've defined as out of scope so you see how it behaves. If you were doing this against an entire set of reports in the folder, the easiest thing is to select all. If you do have that selected, we'll see how Cognos behaves with an out of scope report through this example as well. Again, we're pointing right now towards the target environment, which is Cognos 10, and it is effectively running the reports up in Cognos 10, collecting the report output and bringing it back down to this machine in order to do the comparison. Okay, so what we can see is my out-of-scope report here I've completed the first 2 steps. It failed in the validation for step 3. Even though I selected it for step 4, which is run in the target environment, it was effectively skipped. So you can see how Cognos Lifecycle Manager is going to behave if we take things out of scope. It's going to skip any further work on those items. Now we've effectively laid the groundwork. We've validated and run the reports in our source 841 environment. We've validated and run the reports in our target Cognos 10 environment. The real value of the tool now comes into play with our output comparison. Again, I'm going to select 4 reports. I'm going to skip the out-of-scope report right now myself and say go. What Lifecycle Manager is doing now is it's doing a comparison between the 4 reports that I've selected. And it's looking at the report output. For the first 2, it's identifying that there are no differences in the outputs between those 2 reports, between the source system and the target system. So effectively, the output from those reports are identical. We don't need to do any further work with them. The next 2, the create report with multiple pages and create a crosstab report, are showing some sort of error with regards to the output comparison, and effectively saying that there are differences there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first one, and we'll see what options are available to us within the properties and then ultimately the comparison tool that makes the Lifecycle Manager such a valuable part of a Cognos 10 upgrade project. We have the option to open the report in source or target system, download the report specs and view them directly. We also have a create test archive option so that if we do have a report that is giving us problems and we're really struggling to correct that report and need to involve IBM Cognos support, we can create a test archive which will effectively go out, run the report, create a large list of diagnostics that can then be exported out and sent up to IBM Cognos support so that they have a significant advantage and head start in helping you to troubleshoot the problem. I'm going to go up to the status tab here, and I see that I do have differences. If I click on differences, we have a couple of options. I'm just going to jump into the Flash Output Compare tool, as that one is going to give me the most value. What it's showing me here is my source system and my target system, what the report outputs look like. In this case, just seeing them side by side, it's very obvious that these graphs look different. If I were to look at the second page with a crosstab report, looking relatively the same. Let's overlay these reports. And what I've done is I've effectively placed one report on top of the other. I'm going to zoom in here so I can see this a little bit closer. And with this transparency slider, I can slide the focus more towards my target report or slide it back more towards the source report. If I leave it somewhere in the middle, I'm seeing effectively where the differences are. And it's very obvious that these 2 graphs are drastically different between the 2. Let's take a look at the second page. Maybe there's something there that will help us to understand why there's such a difference. Again, leaving the transparency in the middle, I see a lot of overlap in terms of things that just don't line up within this crosstab here. And as I slide it between the 2 environments, I'm starting to get a sense as to what's happening and why this report failed, the output comparison. If you look at the rows and column labels, you'll see in that Cognos 841, there's no particular rhyme or reason that's evident in terms of the order of the labels. If I slide over to the Cognos 10 version, I do see that Cognos 10 is now sorting rows and column labels within this crosstab. That may or may not be a significant, of significant importance to me, but it's something that I need to take a look at. And following the workflow that's available to me in using Lifecycle Manager, I'm going to reject this report. I'm going to make a quick note there, save that, and then go back to my workspace here. So I can see with the 4 reports that I'm mainly focused on now, I've got 2 no differences, 1's been rejected. I can move on to the next report and continue down that process of validating reports and either fixing the output or at least making comments on areas that we need to take a look at. That's really where the significant value for an upgrade is found within Lifecycle Manager. Touch base real quickly on the dashboard section here. What this is showing me, and it is an exportable dashboard, it's showing me the status of where I'm at with my validation for this entire project. I can see how many succeeded, I can see how many failed the run tests, I can see the same thing under validate, I can see where I've got differences or no differences, where I may have some prompts that are missing, etc. And as I click on these items, I'm getting a little bit more detail where the differences are in these 2 reports, and in this case there are no differences. I'm also seeing the runtime in terms of seconds between source and target. And that's an important factor as well. It's not just about the report output, whether the report validates. If all of a sudden your reports are taking 10 times as long in your target environment, there's probably some tuning that needs to be done or some additional things that need to be factored in before that environment is turned on into a production system. All right, I am showing 26 minutes after the hour. I'm going to jump back relatively quickly to the slides. And I've hidden this slide, but I'll throw it up just for a moment here. We talked briefly about the test case archive for IBM Cognos. And this shows you some of the information that is collected and provided to you in a zip file that you can then send to IBM Cognos support for further help. All right, let's jump into multi-version coexistence. What is that? Big word, what does it actually mean? What multi-version coexistence essentially means is that it allows you in Cognos 10 to serve up content from Cognos 8 right within the Cognos 10 portal. So what does that mean? Effectively, what you are doing is you need to have both your Cognos 8 environment, 8.3, 8.4, or 8.4.1 running, as well as your Cognos 10 environment, but you can move all your users over to Cognos 10, even though the reports that they are running within the Cognos 10 portal may actually be coming from Cognos 8. This gives you the opportunity to upgrade sections of the report at a time before having to worry about getting them all upgraded. There is a white paper up on IBM Cognos support on how to set this up. As I was preparing for this webinar, I'm thinking, okay, how do I show the visual aspects of running Cognos 8 content inside of Cognos 10? Because effectively all you're doing is clicking on a folder, opening up, seeing reports, and running reports. That report may run on your Cognos 8 server and send the content or the report output back to Cognos 10, or it may actually have been upgraded already and actually running on Cognos 10. So there's really no difference. There's nothing visual to see. So I thought I'd take a moment to take a look at the configuration steps. I think there's something a little bit more valuable in how do you configure Cognos 10 for multi-version coexistence. So there's really 3 different areas you need to look at. You need to look at your Cognos 10 environment, and underneath system administration, underneath system here, and I'm going to move a little bit quicker now because we're getting close towards the end of the hour or half-hour time frame, and I want to make sure that we stay on task. Go to Properties, under Settings, underneath Advanced Settings, you'll see there are 3 parameters that we have to add on the Cognos 10 side of the house to enable multi-version coexistence. And effectively what you're doing is you're telling Cognos 10 how to find the Cognos 8.4.1 environment. Going down to my Cognos 8.4.1 environment, in the same spot, we have to provide, I think my VMs must have went to sleep here. We have to provide the same sort of information underneath this particular interface too that points back to Cognos 10. Try that one more time. There we go. Under Settings, Edit, and we see that we're pointing back with the two variables for multi-version coexistence back to the Cognos 10 environment. Lastly, something that is not as obvious is in the IBM Cognos configuration on both servers, your source and target system, you do need to add the domain as a list of valid domain within the application firewall. In this case, dot and then the domain name that's applicable for the particular environment which you're running. So that happens within the configuration directly on the server. Once you have those in place, let me go to Cognos 10, cancel out, and we're right at the half-hour mark, so I'm just going to show you real quick what you will see, what that does for you. Is it will add another button up here on your toolbar, which allows you to link to content from a remote system. So by clicking that, I can go and actually select on my Cognos 841 environment a particular folder that I want to link, and now that new folder shows up here. And then the content of the actual Cognos 841 environment for that folder is in that folder. And if you were to click on reports in that folder, you're actually running an 8.4 report, even though you're accessing it through Cognos 10 as your portal. And again, it gives you the opportunity to use Lifecycle Manager to be very thorough in your validation, upgrading and validating reports sections at a time and making those available, even though all your users may be actually moved over at one time into Cognos 10 and using multiple parts of Cognos 10 to run the reports. All right, I've gone over by a couple minutes here. I appreciate everyone's attention and attendance at our standard Wednesday webinar through BrightStar Partners. Again, any questions that have come up through the GoToMeeting interface, feel free to, or we will get back to you with answers, and we'll make sure to send that out to the group. I'll throw on the screen real quick here my contact information, so if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about here on this webinar, feel free to reach out to me directly, either through email or my office lines there, and I'd be happy to respond to any and all questions. Again, thank you all for your time today, and wish you a good and successful rest of the week. Take care. Bye-bye.